The following day was as sunny as the previous one. I spent the first part of the morning trying to teach Matilda, who was in a terrible mood because she wanted to go outside and ride her pony. After just a couple of hours, she gave up and said that she was going to play with the dogs. When she had left, I started to draw. Rosalie had gone out that morning to enjoy a quiet walk and to sit and read her book in the fields. She had told me to finish a drawing that she herself had started several days earlier. At my feet lay a small dog with rough hair. The dog belonged to Matilda, but she hated the animal and said that it was not well behaved. It really was quite a good dog, but she said that it was not even clever enough to know who its owner was. The truth was that to begin with she had played with the dog all the time, but she had soon got tired of having to look after it. Then, of course, the job became mine, because I was the person who gave Snap food and took him for walks. He grew to love me. I became very fond of him too. Matilda, seeing that the dog preferred to be with me than with her, decided she did not like him and often said that she might sell him. While I was sitting like this, trying to finish Rosalie's drawing, Mrs. Murray suddenly came into the room.
"Miss Gray," she began, "how on earth can you sit inside drawing on such a wonderful day as this?"
Of course, I would not have been doing this for my own pleasure, but Mrs. Murray did not understand that.
"Why don't you go outside with the young ladies?" she added.
"I think, madam," I replied, "that Miss Murray is out reading somewhere, and Miss Matilda is spending time with the dogs."
"Well, I think if Matilda spent more time here, in the classroom with you, she wouldn't need to spend so much time with those silly dogs," she said. "And if you were a little more cheerful and friendly towards Rosalie, then perhaps she wouldn't spend so much time walking around the fields with a book in her hand," she added. Then, after a pause, "And why does she like to be on her own so much?"
"She says that she likes to be alone when she has a new book to read," I explained.
"But why can't she read it in the garden? Why should she go into the fields? And why does she so often seem to bump into Mr. Hatfield when she is out?"
Mrs. Murray was full of questions now.
"And I'm sure I've just seen him from my window this very minute, walking very quickly in the direction of that field where she often sits," she cried. "You should know exactly where she is at all times. Please go and see if she is there," she continued. "It is not right for a young lady to be walking alone like that. Any man at all could approach her and talk to her, and she is often far too friendly with them."
As Mrs. Murray had suggested, I found Rosalie walking by the fields with Mr. Hatfield. As I got near them, I thought that Rosalie certainly did look elegant as she smiled and chatted to Mr. Hatfield. She was walking slowly under the trees with her closed book in one hand, a flower in the other hand, and her long dress moving gently with the light wind. Snap, running ahead of me, interrupted the romantic moment by grabbing her dress in his teeth and pulling at it. This carried on for a moment, until Mr. Hatfield kicked the dog. Snap ran back to me, and as I walked forward to touch him, I heard Mr. Hatfield speak.
"When will I see you again, Miss Murray?"
he asked. He had realised that my arrival meant that the time for him to leave had come.
"At church, I suppose,"
Rosalie replied.
Unless your work brings you here again at the exact moment that I happen to be walking in this field.
Well, he said, I could always manage to have business here if I knew exactly when and where to find you.
Oh,
she said, smiling flirtatiously.
I couldn't possibly know today what I might be doing tomorrow.
Then let me have that flower you were holding to comfort me and remind me of you, he said,
half joking and half serious. He reached his hand out to take the flower.
No,
she said, and moved the flower away.
I won't give you the flower.
Oh, please do, he cried.
I will be a miserable man if you don't.
Don't be so wicked to me. Why say no for something which is so easily given, yet would mean so much to me? Please.
He could not have sounded more desperate had he been begging someone to save his life. Rosalie was clearly enjoying the power she had over this man. After a few moments, she finally said,
"Oh, here then,"
and gave the flower to him.
"Take it and go."
He received the gift happily, said something quietly into her ear that made her laugh and go red in the face, then he left.
"I'm so glad you came,"
Rosalie said to me when he had gone.
"I was beginning to think he would never leave. He's always coming here, pretending that his work for the church has brought him out this way."
"Well," I began, "your mother doesn't want you to go beyond the garden without someone like me to accompany you and fight off all the men. She saw Mr. Hatfield walking towards the fields and sent me out to take care of you straight away."
"Oh, as if I couldn't take care of myself,"
she cried.
"She was telling me to keep away from Mr. Hatfield the other day, but I wouldn't fall in love with him or with anyone. I hate the word love. I might prefer one man to another, but even then I would never prefer Mr. Hatfield. I like talking to him because he's clever and funny, but I'm not at all interested in him. He hasn't got any money. But I must have someone to flirt with, and he's the only person who comes here. When we go out, Mother will only let me flirt with Sir Thomas Ashby, because the plan is that I will marry him, and it's not good for me to be seen with other men. But he's boring, and not half as nice as Mr. Hatfield."
"Is he?" I asked. "Then why do you want to marry him?"
"Well, it doesn't matter that he's boring," she replied. "He's rich, and he'll be all right when he's married. I just wish he wasn't so ugly, but then there aren't very many men to choose from here in the countryside."
"But wouldn't Mr. Hatfield be a better choice?" I asked.
"Well, he would be if he was the Lord of Ashby Park, but he isn't. And the fact is that I must have Ashby Park, and it doesn't matter who I share it with."
I was shocked by Rosalie's attitude. "But Mr. Hatfield clearly thinks that you like him," I said. "He will be very disappointed when he realizes he is wrong."
"Well, it is his own fault for making assumptions about what I might feel. Why on earth does he think that I like him? In fact, I'm looking forward to seeing his face when I tell him that I don't," she replied.
There was nothing I could say that would change her views. 3 days went by before Rosalie went to the fields again. I went with her, but after walking for half an hour or so, she suddenly asked me to go back to the house to get her book for her. When I returned, some time later, She ran towards me. Her cheeks were pink and she was waving to me.
Miss Gray,
she called.
I have some exciting news. Just after you left to get my book, Mr. Hatfield suddenly appeared from nowhere. He chatted for a while and was very polite and said all sorts of things about me, but he is so full of himself. You won't believe this. He actually asked me to marry him.
And you... I started. I was worried about what she was about to tell me.
I stood tall and proud and said how shocked I was that he had proposed, Rosalie explained. I said that surely he had seen nothing in my behaviour to make him think that I would want to marry him. You should have seen him. His face went white. I told him that I did not want to marry him and that my parents would never agree to it. He looked terribly sad, and I almost felt sorry for him. Then he seemed angry. He told me that he loved me greatly and that I had broken his heart, that I had flirted with him and played with him like a toy without any thought of marrying him. Can you believe that he said that?
I certainly did believe it, and I agreed with Mr. Hatfield, but I said nothing.
Then he asked me to keep his proposal to me a secret and tell no one, she went on. He said that if I didn't keep it a secret, he would tell people what I had done. He said no one would want to marry me if they knew how badly I had behaved. So I promised, and then he left.
But you have broken your promise already, I said, truly shocked by how she was talking.
Oh, but it's only you. I know you won't tell anyone, she said, and I will tell my mother, just to show her how wrong she was when she thought that I might fall for him.
Suddenly, I realised why Rosalie seemed so happy. She could now prove to her mother that she had been wrong. I was shocked by how she had behaved toward Mr. Hatfield, and by how much pleasure she seemed to get from seeing the poor man suffer. The only positive thing I saw in the situation was that Mr. Hatfield had escaped what surely would have been a very unhappy life with Rosalie.
Oh, I wish Mr. Hatfield hadn't proposed so soon, said Rosalie to Matilda the next day at 4 o'clock. She was looking out through the window at the fields. Now there is no reason to go out and nothing to look forward to, she added. It's a pity you were so hard on him, said Matilda. He'll never come again, and I think that you actually rather liked him. I hoped that you would marry him and leave all the other men free for me to flirt with. Well, I'm sorry to lose Mr. Hatfield, I have to admit, but there will be other men like him, I suppose. It's Sunday tomorrow. I wonder how he'll look and whether he'll be able to read his sermon. He'll probably have to pretend he is ill and to make Mr. Weston give the service. No, he won't, said Matilda. He's a stronger man than that. Rosalie was a little offended by Matilda's comment, but it seemed that Matilda was right. Mr. Hatfield spoke during the church service as normal, but he never once looked towards where the Murray family were sitting, and he did not leave the church until we had gone. Rosalie was clearly disappointed that he had not looked at her once. However, she said, it proved that he was thinking of her all the time, or he would have looked at her if only by chance. But if he had looked at her, she would have said it was because he thought her so beautiful that he had no choice. After a few more days of being bored at home, Rosalie asked me to walk with her into the village.
She said that she needed some new pencils for her drawing. Really, I think she wanted an excuse to see Mr. Hatfield or flirt with some other men. I have to admit that on the way, I also started to wonder whether we might see Mr. Weston in the village. While Rosalie was in the shop buying her pencils, she made me stand by the door to tell her if anyone interesting passed by. No one did, apart from two of Rosalie's friends, who stopped and chatted to her for a while when she came out. While they were talking, I walked a little way down the street to look in a nearby shop. After only a few minutes, Mr. Weston appeared beside me.
"You were alone again, Miss Gray," he said.
"Yes, but only for a few minutes while Miss Murray talks to her friends," I told him.
"But aren't they your friends too?" he asked.
"No," I replied. "I don't really have any friends here in Horton." We stood for some time talking in a friendly way. We discussed all sorts of things, and he asked me what type of books I liked to read. He listened carefully to what I said, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed interested in my answers. Why would he be interested in what I liked to read and in what I thought and felt? My heart started to beat faster when I thought about the answer to that question. Soon Rosalie arrived and saw that I was talking to Mr. Weston. Rather than being cold to him, as I expected, she smiled and talked to him with unusual cheerfulness. The three of us began to walk along the country road towards Horton Lodge. Before long, Rosalie was talking to Mr. Weston in such a way that there was no space in the conversation for me. I started to feel upset by this as I listened to her speak so confidently to him. She smiled at him, laughed at what he said, and swung her fair hair from side to side. After a while, the road divided, so we said goodbye to Mr. Weston and turned towards Horton Lodge.
"I thought I could do it,"
cried Rosalie once we were some distance away.
"Do what?"
I asked.
"I have shot him through the heart,"
she said.
"He will go home and think of nothing but me."
"How do you know?" I questioned.
"Oh, there were many things that gave it away," she told me, "but especially the way that he looked at me when he said goodbye to us. It was such a gentle, caring look. Ha! He's not quite as stupid as I thought."
I did not answer. My heart felt as if it was in my throat. I was worried that if I spoke, I would cry. "Please, please do not let this happen," I said silently to myself, "for his sake, not mine." As we continued the walk back to the house, all I could give were one-word answers to Rosalie's cheerful chatter. I was in shock, and I wanted to go straight to my room and cry. The next Sunday was one of the greyest days of April, with dark clouds and heavy rain showers. I went to church with Rosalie, and despite the recent conversation between Rosalie and Mr. Weston, I was still very much looking forward to seeing him and hearing him preach the sermon. It was raining heavily, and as we were leaving the church, Rosalie said that she wanted to wait inside the door for the carriage. Of course, a few moments later, Mr. Weston came to the door, and Rosalie started a conversation with him. She asked him if he would come and see a young girl who was ill and who lived in one of the estate cottages. He promised that he would go to see her the next day.
"And what time do you think you might go to see her?"
asked Rosalie.
I'm sure her mother would like to know so that she can tidy up the house and make you feel welcome. Perhaps I could come and introduce you to them."
Rosalie, who usually only thought of herself, had suddenly become helpful and generous. Mr. Weston said that he would try to be there at 11 o'clock in the morning. I felt sure that this was just an excuse for her to meet him again. The carriage had now arrived, and the footman was waiting with an open umbrella to help Rosalie get into the carriage. Straight away, Mr. Weston stepped forward and offered to cover me with his umbrella.
"No, thank you. I don't mind the rain," I said. I always said the most stupid things when I felt shy and did not have much time to think.
"But you don't actually like the rain, I suppose?" he replied, with a smile that showed me that he was not offended. I could not disagree with that comment, and so I allowed him to cover me with his umbrella as I walked to the carriage. He put out his hand to help me climb up the steps. Then he looked directly into my eyes and smiled as he closed the little door behind me. It was only a small smile, and it was only for a moment, but I saw in it, or I thought I saw in it, a meaning of great importance. It gave me more hope than I had ever had before that he might care about me. The next morning, Rosalie came into the schoolroom.
"Matilda, I want you to go for a walk with me around 11 o'clock today," she said.
I remembered that was the time Mr. Weston was going to visit the cottagers.
"Oh, I can't possibly go for a walk. I'm busy," said Matilda. "Miss Gray must go with you." "No, I want you to come," said Rosalie, and explained why in a whisper, so Matilda agreed to go. That night at dinner, the girls told me about their walk. They had bumped into Mr. Weston and had a long, enjoyable walk with him. They found him surprisingly pleasant and interesting, and he had clearly enjoyed walking with them too, they said.